Well, downright unjust and inhumane. That's how the Victorian Ombudsman has described the state government's handling of its border permit scheme, officially handing down her report after months of investigations. Victorian Ombudsman Deborah Glass joins us now from Melbourne. Deborah, good morning to you and thank you for your time again this morning. You say the consequences for thousands of Victorians who were stuck across the border were vast and unfair. Can you just explain those findings a bit more for us?
Well, as everybody will recall, Victorians are used to being locked down, we're used to border closures, but what happened in July was the border was basically slammed shut and thousands of people were left stranded. Now, the government gave lots of official warnings about that, and there was an exemption scheme which should have allowed people to be able to get home on compassionate grounds. In practice, we saw very little compassion being shown, and that meant that people couldn't get back for all kinds of really important reasons, like funerals and seeing sick children and caring for their animals. And it was, the anguish that we heard from people when they spoke to us was really palpable.
Well, this is going to validate, I think, the feelings of so many Victorians who did experience very genuine hardship at that time. Of the thousands of applications that were submitted, only 8% of them were granted. What justification has been given for that?
Well, there wasn't a lot of justification. In fact, what we saw when we looked at the numbers is the vast majority of these applications didn't get to a decision maker at all. So they expired. For example, they expired because a travel date had passed, because the application wasn't processed in time. So people simply found that they had to start again, and they didn't know why, they didn't know what they needed to do to be able to get a permit. So there was a bit of a sort of bureaucratic merry-go-round going on for a whole raft of people who were just desperately trying to get home.
So many of these applications weren't even reviewed, weren't even seen by the bureaucrats in charge.
Well, they were reviewed by lower level, public officials who were acting on guidance. So they were, for example, they were requiring an enormous amount of documentation, evidence to support the application. Including, in one woman's case, births, deaths, marriage certificates, driver's license, an awful lot, statements, statute declarations, statements from doctors, the sort of thing would be quite hard for you to get when you're in temporary accommodation across the border and possibly without internet access.
What a mess. I mean, as you point out, people missed funerals, others were unable to cross for medical treatment, people had to stump up money for weeks and weeks of accommodation because they were locked out of their homes. Are families entitled to compensation, do you think?
Well, what I've recommended in this report is that the government publicly acknowledge the distress caused to so many thousands of people when they were stranded across the border, and consider ways to alleviate this. And that could include ex gratia payments. I'm not talking about compensation as such. If people think they have a claim against the government, that must be a matter for them. But I think a public acknowledgement and an ex gratia scheme would go a long way to alleviating the kind of distress we heard from so many people.
Well, the ball is in Dan Andrews' court there. Deborah Glass, we appreciate your time. Thank you.